I think that's this last time I have to listen to that song. Defining me as, labeling me as a sexy thing. I think Castle should do a campaign around that. I'm more than that. So we've had a bit of a drop off here. I hope it's not ABSA. I'm sorry, I'm biased. The Red Bank, I appreciate it for all the people in this room. So our last two speakers are truly amazing. It gives me a privilege now to introduce Khaya Dlanga. He's a communist. A communist? I was doing so well. I was saying to myself in the bathroom just now, you're doing well. You haven't stuffed up yet. Columnist. A columnist, it sounds similar. And an author. I'm actually reading his second book at the moment. 2 best-selling books. Just some insights on Khaya. He only sent me one. He says he really likes melancholic music because it makes him happy. And then, of course, knowing him, I also know that he doesn't eat black jelly babies. He's been an advisor to me on my book, and I'm really appreciative of the input you've given me into my endeavors. So a great privilege, Khaya, to introduce you to the audience.
So I just want to talk to you about my talk is called Data Does Not Trump Our Humanity. That's my talk. But I'm sure every now and then I'll kind of rift off because I have a very short attention. Sorry. I don't know how he got there. I should have built a wall. I should have built a wall around that guy. I don't know what he's doing there. So if you are a nerd like me, right? If you're a nerd like me, when you hear the word data, there's one thing you think about. You think about this guy, Lieutenant Commander Data of the USS Enterprise. Oh my God, you guys are nerds. Do you know who that is? Yeah, that's what I thought about. Literally, that's the first thing I thought about when I think about data. Even though I work for a company that only sells data, that's the first thing I think about. That guy, he's probably my all-time Star Trek favorite character. Love the guy. And I also have another confession to make. When I was Googling to find his picture, I realized that I cannot spell, even though I've got 3 books. And this is the evidence. Look at this. Maybe if I had drank some Woolies water, I wouldn't have been able to. I think that's the thing that I was missing here. I love what Mark Twain said. Mark Twain said that anyone who can only think of one way to spell a word obviously lacks imagination. I have no respect for a man who can spell a word only one way. So I think I'm in great company with Mark Twain. So let me tell you about a guy called Alfred Kaiser Boyce. Many of you do not know Alfred Kaiser Boyce. Picture this moment that I'm about to tell you. Picture in your head. Alfred Kaiser Boyce, it's 1988. His wife of 40 years is dead. He is at the funeral of his wife. He's inside this church. And he gets up to walk up to the podium. As he approaches the podium, you can see his grief-stricken face. He is devastated. And he stops next to the open casket, and he reaches into his pocket, and he takes out a letter, and he leaves the letter in the coffin. And then he touches his dead wife's hand and goes back to sit down and does not go to speak. I imagine that the data that you have in your head, all of you right now, because you sing Alfred Kaiser Boyce, you think Alfred Kaiser Boyce is a white man. You also think that Alfred Kaiser Boyce, because it's 1988, how can he have such a romantic gesture, but he's a black man? Alfred Kaiser Boyce is my grandfather. And this was when my grandmother had passed away. And he was so devastated. I remember that moment so vividly because to me, he was a strong man, who never cried, that everyone was absolutely afraid of. And I always think that the data that we always use we always use it to remove humanity from people. Or we use data to remove what is sensible and what is right. We forget that actually data is also meant to enhance humanity. And let me skip that great line. So this is where I was born, and that's where I grew up. That was my home. I spent like the first 12 years of my life here. And this is Alfred Kaiser Boyce's house. Alfred Kaiser Boyce loved his livestock, his cattle. You were only allowed to have 30 a maximum of 30 cattle back here during apartheid in the village. And he had 60 sheep, and he had about 7 horses. If he sent any of my cousins to a neighboring village on his horse, and the horse came back sweating, do you know what he did to the guy? He would get on another horse and chase this boy all the way to that village where he sent him and come back with him, and you are running behind him the whole time. So my grandfather was a very strict man. And when he called my name or anybody's name, he would not say, he would summon you. He would say, Khaya Dlanga, that's my name. And then you had to say, Tatomkhulu, which is grandfather, and you ran to him. You couldn't walk. You were not allowed to jog to him. You had to run to my grandfather when he called you. And so I think that one day after we were in the fields, one of these fields, we were looking after my grandfather's cattle. And around 4:30 in the afternoon, like every day we'd bring the livestock back home, we close the crawl, and then you start counting all the cows. And then we realized that one was missing. And my grandfather loves his livestock. He loved his livestock. You know, where you count 5 times to make sure that you must have made a mistake, and then you stop counting and they start calling all of them by name, all the cows, to think which one you haven't mentioned. And then I realized there really is one cow missing, and I cannot go home and eat now. So my cousin and I, we go to the village, up and down, neighboring village, until 10 o'clock looking for this cow. We're about 8 years old. 8, 9 years old, and we come back at about 10 o'clock. Now, you got to know, if you know village life, especially back then in the Eastern Cape, by 7 o'clock, 7:30, everybody is sleeping because everybody's eating, there's no television. The 7 o'clock story that you listen to on radio is done. The prayers are done. Everyone is sleeping. And I kept walking up and down looking for my grandfather's cow because I knew today was my dying day if I did not bring this cow home. Eventually, 10 o'clock, I get home. I arrive, I open the gate. My grandfather is standing in the veranda. He says, Makweten, Nivelap. We run to him, so we have to run to him. But my cousin and I, we're jogging because we don't want to get to him first. Nobody wants to get to him first. And he's got his whip with him. It's like, oh my God, this is truly the day we die. And then he says, and then I tell him, look, we're going to look for a lost cow. And he says, I don't give a damn about a damn goddamn cow. What if something happened to you? Go and eat. And now go and run and eat. And here's this thing. If you're eating as a boy, you have to eat like a man. So you can't eat like this. So like you have to eat like we're eating. So we're eating very quickly and we're done. And I realized one thing. I think I'm looking back now about how I understand data. You may be wondering, what does this have anything to do with data? And it says data must be used to enhance our humanity and not eliminate it. And I think what I'd done with the data when I was looking at my grandfather was that I wanted to prove my bias about my grandfather. And the bias I wanted to prove was that my grandfather loves his cattle more than he loves me. And we do that a lot when it comes to data. We want it to prove our biases. And you may be wondering, so Khaya, what does this have? You know, what's data got to do with it? And that is to misquote Tina Turner. But what data, I'll tell you why. I'm going to use an example. I used to work for a very little-known company called Coca-Cola. Anybody's heard of this company? Very unknown. So I used to work for Coca-Cola. And when I worked for Coca-Cola, I decided that I needed to understand what kind of ads resonated and what ads did not work. So I went to a research agency and asked them to do some work for me. And I said, if you could go over the last 10 years, look at every single industry. So look at cars, look at banks, look at beer, look at cell phones, and look at the common threads that made work great and the common threads that made work really terrible. What were they? A few months later, the agency comes back with a whole and it's very, very extensive research. And what was quite interesting that one of the number one things that really, when work and ad worked really well, there was food on the table. It was weird, there was food, but if there was chicken, it was even better. And the number one thing that did not work for black consumers was having an animal in the ad. If there's an animal in the ad, the evidence was irrefutable. You couldn't deny it. It was very clear. And so the very first Jericho campaign, a few months later, I briefed my agency at the time. They come back with this fantastic ad that I love. Does not have a dog. Beautiful, and I love this ad. It's got a dog, and I'm like, oh my goodness. But this is such a lovely ad. It's such a beautiful ad. It's fantastic. I love it. And then I said, okay, guys, let's go and present this to everybody back at Coke. And I'm hoping no one remembers the research. I'm hoping nobody's going to remember it. And they go there, and they present this ad. And I'm laughing, kind of telegraphing so that everybody else likes the ads along with me. And then what happens is that now everybody looks at me, my boss, and they turn to me, they say, so this is the ad you're saying you are buying? It's like, yeah, it's an amazing ad. But don't you remember that the research that you commissioned a few months ago said that black people don't like animals in their ads? And I said, yes, this is true. But you think it's going, I said, I think it's absolutely going to work. And the question was, why do I think it's going to work? And I said the difference here is that what the research agency didn't do was that they stopped at the data. They did not try to understand why the data was saying what it was saying. And I said, if you look at all the ads that didn't work with animals, it's because you had an animal in the house being treated like a freaking human being. It's in your bed. It's sitting in your couch. You're not going to see a dog in the township in your house, in the couch doing that. And again, it's licking your face. Ew. Ah. And in the township, dogs are supposed to be outside and they have a job to do. And they walk outside. That's what they're doing. That's what they do. And I said the difference with this particular dog is that it's doing what a dog is supposed to do. It's walking outside. It's just out there outside. And although the difference with this particular dog was that it could read. But that's besides the point, So this dog could read. It was looking for its name on all sorts of Coke cans. I'm not going to show the ad because it's delayed time. You can YouTube, you know it. Yeah, you know it. So now, to the credit of my boss at the time, she says, I am going to trust you. Go ahead and shoot this ad. And I get the biggest budget I've ever had in my life. The responsibility on my shoulder at this point, I was like, oh my goodness, I think I'm going to destroy an incredible campaign. I have all sorts of self-doubt while I'm looking at this. I take the ad to the research agency because you can't flight an ad without taking it through research. Take it to research, and the research agency, oh my God, it's going to fail dismally. It's just not going to work. Don't you remember the research you asked for that said no animals in ads? And I'm like, guys, it's okay. Just do your job. I'll do mine. So they come back with the research. I have never seen research people so happy in my entire life. It's like they made the ad themselves. They're like, oh, their likability scores are through the roof. We've never seen numbers like this. It's incredible. It's the best ad we've ever tested, ever in our history. And they start they look at what ads that Coca-Cola had done over the last 12 years, like 6,000 worldwide, and it's in the top 2% best performing ever of all time. It's like they made the ad. And so the point I'm making here is that if you had the wrong people in the room, that ad would have been kicked out. because they would have looked at the data and they said, this is what the data says, without understanding why. And I feel that a lot of marketers do not try to go beyond the facts that the data says. I don't know if it's laziness or it's just a matter of trying to protect ourselves. And basically, that was that was a dog. But basically, this dog, by the way, guys, this dog, we got it from Hollywood. We couldn't find a dog that could perform in South Africa. And I kid you not. I kid you not. I kid you not. But it's also a prima donna, and the reason is because it's licking my face. It said, if you don't let me lick your face, I'll go to my trailer. I can't work like this. So that's how we have that picture. I hadn't discovered Woolworths water then, even then. So like I said, data must be used to enhance creativity, not to police it, nor to inhibit it. And I think that's what we use the data for, a lot of marketers. And also, I find this to be very true, that intuition is often logic your mind hasn't told you yet. You don't know that you have already worked it out. And I think for me, when I made the defense, it's because in my mind I'd worked it out, but I didn't have proof. My intuition told me something, but then I had to be trusted to make the work happen in order to get the results that we got. Unfortunately, way too many marketers mistake fear-based decision-making for data decision-making. So they say the data say this, but it's mostly because they're scared. And they don't want to venture out and do anything that will kind of, and I feel, I think most of the work that I remember, most of the work that I love, most of the work that I enjoy, always upsets something that we've always known. It always does something a little bit different. And funny enough, what we did a few years later is that I think for about 2 more campaigns, we had dogs in ads after that because of that. Because there was an understanding now why it is okay to have animals in ads. And I also think, if you only have people who look like you have people with the same accent as you have people who went to the same school as you did, you are not going to be able to make the best decisions. Had I not been in this room that day, I don't think that decision would have been made. Had I not been in the room. But not only that, it is also not enough just to have diverse people in the room, but they should be able to make the decisions. And I think that is a very important thing that we, I think as an industry, need to start taking a lot more seriously about the people in the room. And I also think besides the people in the room, is that when you're in the room and the other people are not in it, you've got to think about who is not in the room. Because these mistakes here happen because we're not thinking about who is not in the room. And I think a person like me, who grew up in a village, who also grew up in a township, and happened to go to a white school, and then started working in a white environment, is that I don't have to be taught white behavior, what white people like. Because all my life, I've grown knowing it. And I think what needs to happen is that our fellow white marketeers have got to have a way of ingraining yourself in the market. And I'm not talking about in the market. I'm not talking about you going on trade visit. That is not understanding your market. I'm not saying that you go I don't know, you trade visit and then your research agency tells you, okay, black people like this, or black diamond research. That is not understanding your market. You've got to live in their lives. Oh, good grief, I have a minute. What I'm saying is that you've got to know your data, but you've got to be human. And that, for me, is the most important thing that marketers need to understand at this day and age. And that is my time, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you so much for listening to me. And Pepe, loved your book. You're an amazing guy. And thank you for staying to listen to me. Now you can go home. No, I mean, yes, I go.